August 23, 1942, Morozovskaya Airfield, Soviet Southern Front. Major Heinrich Rall's boots crunched across the frost-hardened grass as he approached the wreckage Soviet forces had abandoned during their hasty retreat 3 hours earlier. The downed aircraft sat crumpled near the tree line, fabric wings torn, wooden frame splintered. He'd been told to examine it personally. This cannot be what they're using against us, Rall thought, circling the debris. No modern Air Force would send pilots into combat in agricultural trainers. The aircraft was a Polikarpov PO-2, a biplane design from 1928. Rall knew the type. Obsolete crop dusters and flight training aircraft the Luftwaffe had dismissed as militarily irrelevant. Maximum speed, perhaps 150 kilometers per hour. Service ceiling, barely 3,000 meters. The fuselage was plywood and fabric stretched over a wooden frame. He could push his finger through the torn canvas covering the wings. But what stopped him cold were the bomb racks. Crude metal rails had been welded to the lower wing struts, designed to carry 6 small bombs, perhaps 200 kilograms total payload. Wire release mechanisms ran into the rear cockpit. No bomb bay, no defensive armament, no radio equipment visible in the shattered cockpit. The fuel tank behind the engine was unarred aluminum, exposed and vulnerable. 2 bodies lay nearby under canvas, Soviet women in flight suits, faces peaceful despite violent death. The pilot appeared no older than 23. Rall had commanded night fighter operations for 6 weeks. His men reported increasing attacks after midnight, bombs dropping from nowhere, explosions tearing through encampments, supply depots burning. Searchlights swept empty sky. Anti-aircraft batteries fired at sounds they couldn't locate. The troops had started calling the attackers Nacht Hexen, night witches, because the only warning was a soft whooshing noise like broomsticks cutting through air. Before bombs fell. Wehrmacht intelligence had dismissed reports of women pilots as propaganda, Soviet desperation, impossible threats. The wreckage before him told a different story. These women were flying obsolete trainers into combat zones every night, carrying just enough explosives to terrorize German positions. The journey to this revelation had begun 14 months earlier, when Nazi Germany invaded the Soviet Union on June 22, 1941. Operation Barbarossa shattered Soviet air defenses within weeks. The Red Air Force lost over 4,000 aircraft in the first 10 days. By autumn 1941, the USSR faced catastrophic pilot shortages across all fronts. Marina Raskova, the Soviet Union's most celebrated female aviator, petitioned Joseph Stalin directly in September 1941 with an audacious proposal: create 3 all-female air combat regiments. Raskova had set long-distance flight records in the 1930s, earning Hero of the Soviet Union honors in 1938. Stalin approved on October 8, 1941, authorizing Aviation Group 122, 3 units including the 588th Night Bomber Regiment. The 588th received equipment in December 1941, Polikarpov PO-2 biplanes, designed in 1928 by Nikolai Polikarpov as the U-2 primary trainer. The aircraft featured an M11 5-cylinder radial engine producing 125 horsepower, maximum speed of 152 kilometers per hour at sea level, service ceiling of 3,000 meters, and range of 530 kilometers. The 2-seat open cockpit accommodated pilot and navigator. The airframe used plywood ribs covered with fabric doped for weather resistance. Empty weight, 635 kilograms.
For bombing missions, Soviet engineers added 6 underwing racks carrying FAB-50 or FAB-100 bombs, 50-kilogram or 100-kilogram high-explosive ordnance, totaling 200 to 300-kilogram payloads. The navigator manually released bombs via wire mechanisms while consulting cloth maps and stopwatches for navigation. No bomb sight. No radio communication. No parachutes. The aircraft couldn't carry the additional weight. No defensive armament. Adding machine guns would reduce bomb capacity. The mathematics were brutal. Each mission required flying at night using visual navigation exclusively. Pilots followed rivers, railroad tracks, and roads visible in moonlight or starlight. Navigation precision determined whether bombs hit German supply columns or empty fields. The PO-2's 152 km/h maximum speed meant 90-minute flights to targets 100 kilometers distant. Round trip, 3 hours minimum. Training began at Engels Airfield near Saratov in January 1942. 80 women volunteers, ages 17 to 26, learned night flying, visual navigation, and bombing procedures. Most had civilian flying experience as instructors or agricultural pilots. Regimental commander Yevdukokia Bershanskaya, age 30, had logged 4,000 hours in PO-2 aircraft before the war. Chief of Staff Irina Rakoboskaya coordinated operations with ruthless efficiency. Navigator Nadezhda Nadia Popova, age 19, would eventually fly more combat missions than any other Soviet aviator. The 588th deployed to the Southern Front on May 27, 1942, assigned to support Soviet forces defending the Caucasus region. Initial missions targeted German forward airfields, ammunition depots, and troop concentrations. The first combat mission launched on June 8, 1942, near the Sea of Azov. 5 PO-2 crews departed Novopokrovskaya airfield at 2240, targeting Wehrmacht encampments 15 kilometers behind German lines. Navigator Riza Aronova, age 21, sat in the rear cockpit of the lead aircraft piloted by Lieutenant Nina Ulyanenko. The tactic they employed would define the regiment's entire combat doctrine. Approaching targets at 3,000 meters altitude, pilots cut their engines several kilometers away, gliding silently toward German positions. The only sound was wind whistling through wing braces, that distinctive whooshing noise. Gliding at 50 meters altitude in total darkness, navigators released bombs manually at precise moments calculated from speed, altitude, and visual references. No bomb sight. No radio communication. No parachutes. The aircraft couldn't carry the additional weight. No defensive armament. Through the summer and autumn of 1942, the pattern repeated across the Eastern Front with relentless consistency. They hit German positions near Stalingrad on August 23, 1942. 12 PO-2 crews flew 18 sorties each that night. 216 total missions between sunset and dawn. Each aircraft carried 200 kilograms of bombs. Total ordnance delivered 43,200 kilograms in 12 hours. The Wehrmacht's 297th Infantry Division reported constant attacks preventing troop rest for 3 consecutive nights. Frontline commanders documented severe psychological strain among soldiers who couldn't sleep, couldn't predict attacks, couldn't defend against enemies they couldn't see. They attacked Wehrmacht positions in the North Caucasus Mountains on September 15, 1942. The terrain seemed impossible for night navigation. No roads, few landmarks, heavy forests. Yet the night witches used rivers and mountain passes visible in moonlight, delivering bombs with precision that astounded German intelligence officers. One captured Soviet navigator's map showed hand-drawn topographical features marked with estimated flight times and compass headings. The Germans couldn't comprehend how women flying obsolete biplanes without instruments were achieving accuracy rates comparable to modern bombers using sophisticated equipment. They struck German supply lines near the Kuban River on October 7, 1942. Nadezhda Popova flew 15 missions that night, her navigator, Katya Ryabova, releasing bombs on Wehrmacht truck columns, fuel depots, and ammunition storage. By dawn, they'd destroyed or damaged over 40 vehicles. Popova's aircraft returned with 11 bullet holes, rifle fire from German infantry who'd finally spotted the low-flying biplane. The fabric wings still held. The wooden frame remained intact. They flew again the next night. From the German perspective, fighting the Night Witches was psychologically exhausting and tactically frustrating. Luftwaffe night fighters, Messerschmitt Bf-110s, and later Focke-Wulf FW-190s attempted interceptions starting in July 1942. The results humiliated German pilots. The Me-110 stalled at 180 kilometers per hour. The PO-2 cruised at 150 kilometers per hour. Attempting to slow enough to engage meant risking stalls and crashes. One Luftwaffe pilot reported, "It was like trying to hunt a bicycle with a racing car. The speeds were incompatible." German anti-aircraft batteries using sound detection equipment couldn't track the gliding biplanes. The systems required continuous engine noise for triangulation. Searchlight operators swept sky sections systematically, but the PO-2s were small, dark, and maneuverable. Radar systems were useless. The wooden frames and fabric covering produced minimal returns. The advantage period for the Night Witches extended through 1942 and into 1943, because their supposed obsolescence was actually perfect protection. Modern weapon systems were designed to counter modern threats. The PO-2 was too primitive for sophisticated countermeasures, too slow for fighters, too quiet for sound detection, too small for visual acquisition, too low-tech for radar. But this advantage depended entirely on one critical factor: operating at night, in darkness, when German technological superiority couldn't compensate for the PO-2's unique characteristics.
By mid-1942, the tactical picture began to change, not because German countermeasures improved, but because the Wehrmacht adapted through sheer desperation and began offering rewards that revealed genuine fear. On September 12, 1942, near Malgobekskaya in the Caucasus, German anti-aircraft batteries achieved their first confirmed Night Witch kill. Searchlight operators abandoned systematic sweeping and instead focused multiple lights on small sky sections, creating overlapping illumination zones. At 0137, 3 searchlights converged on Lieutenant Vera Bellick's Po-2 at 800 meters altitude. Blinded, Bellick attempted to dive away. Flak batteries opened fire with 20mm and 37mm cannons. The Po-2 disintegrated in mid-air. Bellick and her navigator, Lyubov Gubina, died instantly. The Germans had discovered that concentrated, coordinated searchlight work could occasionally catch the slow-moving biplanes, but the success rate remained below 5%. The Night Witches continued flying. What happened next revealed how seriously Wehrmacht commanders viewed the threat. In October 1942, German military leadership issued a remarkable order. Any Luftwaffe pilot or anti-aircraft gunner who successfully shot down a knocked Hexen aircraft would automatically receive the Iron Cross, Germany's highest military decoration for valor. The order appeared in unit briefings across the southern and eastern fronts.
It was not classified. Soldiers discussed it openly. This decision was unprecedented. Iron Cross awards typically required extraordinary acts of bravery, saving comrades under fire, destroying multiple enemy tanks, holding positions against overwhelming odds. The Wehrmacht was offering its highest honor for shooting down obsolete training aircraft flown by women. The implication was unmistakable. The Night Witches had become a genuine threat that justified extraordinary incentives to counter them. German soldiers' letters and diaries from this period documented the psychological warfare impact. Unteroffizier Hans Weber, 94th Infantry Division, wrote in November 1942, "We don't sleep anymore. Every night they come, sometimes 3 times, sometimes 15 times. We hear the whooshing sound and dive into our bunkers, but the sound is everywhere and we don't know where the bombs will land. Yesterday morning, Friedrich was found crying in his foxhole. He's 22 years old and cannot stop shaking. The officers say they're just women in old planes, but Friedrich says they're witches who can see in the dark and know where we hide." Lieutenant Karl Meister, Luftwaffe night fighter pilot, recorded his frustration in December 1942. "I took off at 02:15 to intercept the Soviet biplanes. Ground control vectored me toward multiple contacts. I saw nothing. My airspeed was 280 kilometers per hour, too fast to spot them, too slow to fly safely at this altitude. I descended to 500 meters and throttled back until my Bf-110 was shuddering, almost stalling. Finally, I saw one, a tiny biplane perhaps 200 meters ahead. I close to 100 meters, lined up my shot. Then it simply turned sharply left, almost hovering in the air. I couldn't turn that tightly without stalling. It vanished. I spent 40 minutes hunting shadows and landed with nothing accomplished. Meanwhile, they bombed our airfield twice. But the most revealing evidence came when Soviet forces overran German positions in early 1943 and captured Wehrmacht intelligence reports. On February 18, 1943, Red Army units seized documents from the German 4th Panzer Army headquarters near Rostov. Among them was a classified analysis titled "Countermeasures Against Soviet Night Harassment Aircraft," dated January 1943. The document assessed various approaches the Wehrmacht had attempted. Increased searchlight deployment, marginal effectiveness, aircraft are too maneuverable when illuminated. Dedicated night fighter patrols, unsuccessful. Speed differential makes engagement impossible. Fuel consumption prohibitive. Sound detection equipment, ineffective. Target aircraft cut engines during approach. Radar systems, minimal returns from wooden construction. The report's conclusion was damning. No reliable countermeasure currently exists. The primitive nature of enemy aircraft makes conventional methods ineffective. Recommend acceptance of continued harassment as unavoidable cost of operations in this theater. German commanders, in other words, had concluded they couldn't stop the Night Witches with available technology. The only solution was enduring nightly attacks. Meanwhile, captured Po-2 aircraft underwent detailed examination by Luftwaffe technical intelligence units. In March 1943, Hauptmann Friedrich Stahl, a German aeronautical engineer assigned to Luftwaffe intelligence, examined an intact Po-2 that had been forced down near Krasnodar. His report documented every aspect of the aircraft with scientific precision. The airframe was wooden, primarily plywood and pine. The covering was Irish linen fabric treated with nitrate dope. Stahl calculated that the entire aircraft weighed less than 650 kilograms empty. The M11 engine produced barely 125 horsepower. Maximum speed at sea level 152 kilometers per hour. Service ceiling 3,000 meters. Most shocking, the fuel tank was unarmored aluminum, positioned directly behind the engine where any frontal attack would ignite it instantly. No self-sealing mechanism. No fire suppression system. The Polikarpov Po-2's journey to military service had nothing to do with combat intentions and everything to do with practical economics. In 1927, the Soviet Union's nascent aviation industry required a simple, inexpensive, reliable trainer for the OSA Aviakiem, the Society for Assistance to Defense, Aviation, and Chemical Industry, which trained civilian pilots for eventual military service. The requirement specified a two-seat biplane capable of training beginning pilots, performing agricultural work, and supporting basic transport duties. Maximum cost, minimal. Production requirements, rapid and simple. The specifications demanded maximum speed, 120 to 150 kilometers per hour, adequate for training. Service ceiling, 3,000 to 4,000 meters, sufficient for basic maneuvers. Range, 400 to 500 kilometers, regional operations. Crew, 2. Instructor and student, or pilot and observer. Construction, materials available in Soviet Union without imports. Maintenance, repairable by mechanics with basic training. Operational environment, capable of operating from unprepared fields. The designer selected was Nikolai Nikolaevich Polikarpov, age 35 in 1927, already famous for the I-5 fighter design. Polikarpov had survived Stalin's purges by producing aircraft designs on demanding schedules while imprisoned. He understood that Soviet industrial capacity limited materials choices. The impossible choice facing Polikarpov was fundamental. Create an aircraft simple enough for mass production using available materials while meeting performance requirements that demanded specific engineering trade-offs. The mathematics were brutally simple. To achieve stable flight characteristics necessary for training beginning pilots, the aircraft needed biplane configuration for maximum lift at low speeds. This meant extensive wing bracing, struts and wires creating drag. High drag meant low speed. Low speed meant weak engines were sufficient. Weak engines meant lightweight requirements. Lightweight meant minimal structure. Polikarpov chose plywood and fabric construction, materials Soviet factories could produce in quantity. Wood frame provided adequate strength-to-weight ratios for the slow-speed flight regime. Fabric covering reduced weight further and simplified repairs. The M11 five-cylinder radial engine produced just 100 horsepower initially, later 125 horsepower, but weighed only 165 kilograms. Every decision prioritized simplicity over performance. The landing gear was fixed, no retraction mechanism to fail or add weight. The control systems used direct cable linkages, reliable but draggy. The fuel system was gravity-fed, no pumps required. The fuel tank was bare aluminum positioned behind the engine for weight distribution. No armor, no fire protection systems. These choices made perfect sense for the aircraft's intended role. A civilian trainer operating from grass fields didn't need armor or self-sealing fuel tanks. Students learning to fly didn't require high-speed performance or sophisticated systems. Agricultural pilots dusting crops needed reliability and simplicity, not defensive armament. The first U-2, later redesignated Po-2, flew on January 7, 1928. It proved exactly what Polikarpov intended: stable, forgiving, simple to maintain, and cheap to produce. By 1941, Soviet industry had built over 13,000 U-2/Po-2 aircraft. They served as trainers, agricultural crop dusters, air ambulances, liaison transports, and utility aircraft across the Soviet Union. Nobody designed the Po-2 as a combat aircraft. Its military conversion happened through desperate improvisation. When Marina Raskova petitioned Stalin in September 1941 for female combat aviation units, Soviet industry couldn't spare modern aircraft. The Red Air Force needed every available fighter and bomber for frontline operations. The only aircraft available in quantity were U-2/Po-2 trainers, thousands of them, stationed at aviation schools and agricultural centers. The modification was crude. Engineers welded bomb racks to the lower wing struts. They installed wire release mechanisms connected to the navigator's cockpit. They removed unnecessary equipment to reduce weight. Total modification time approximately 8 hours per aircraft. The resulting bomber carried 200 to 300 kilograms of. The systematic losses came not to the night witches, but to German forces who couldn't defend against them. The Battle of Stalingrad, August 1942 through February 1943, became the proving ground for the 588th's tactics. On the night of October 14-15, 1942, during the fiercest urban fighting, 12 Night Witch crews flew 180 combined sorties, 15 missions per crew. They targeted German artillery positions, ammunition depots, and infantry concentrations across a front barely 8 kilometers wide. Obergefreiter Wilhelm Hoffmann, 267th Infantry Regiment, 94th Infantry Division, wrote in his diary entry for October 15, 1942, "Last night was hell. Not from artillery, from those damned women in their sewing machine planes. Every hour, bombs falling. We can't sleep. We can't rest. We can't repair equipment because explosions keep hitting our workshops. My hands shake constantly now. I'm 24 years old, and I feel like an old man." The Wehrmacht's 6th Army recorded that Night Witch attacks forced dispersal of supply concentrations, complicated ammunition distribution, and created severe morale degradation among frontline troops. German casualties from the actual bombing were modest, perhaps 200 to 300 killed across 5 months of Stalingrad operations. But the psychological impact was devastating. Soldiers who couldn't sleep for weeks performed poorly in combat. Officers reported discipline problems, combat refusals, and psychological breakdowns at rates significantly higher in units subjected to nightly harassment. The mathematics of attrition worked in the Soviets' favor through sheer operational tempo. On November 23, 1942, during the Soviet counteroffensive encircling Stalingrad, the 588th flew 240 combined sorties supporting advancing Red Army units. They dropped 48,000 kilograms of bombs on retreating German columns. Total losses: 2 Po-2 aircraft shot down, 4 crew members killed. The Germans lost over 800 trucks, killed or damaged, plus 3 ammunition depots destroyed. On January 18, 1943, Night Witch crews attacked German positions near Potomnik Airfield, the last major Luftwaffe transport hub inside the Stalingrad pocket. 30 missions that night destroyed fuel storage facilities and damaged transport aircraft on the ground. German forces evacuating Stalingrad lost critical airlift capacity when they could least afford it. By February 2, 1943, when Field Marshal Friedrich Paulus surrendered, the 588th Night Bomber Regiment had flown over 3,000 sorties at Stalingrad alone. Total combat losses: 8 aircraft, 16 crew members. The exchange ratio was catastrophically one-sided, but not in the direction Wehrmacht planners had predicted. The pattern continued across 1943 as Soviet forces advanced westward. Failed modification attempts exposed the Po-2's vulnerability while proving the tactical doctrine's soundness. In March 1943, Soviet engineers installed Shahkas 7.62 machine guns in rear cockpits of experimental Po-2 variants, giving navigators defensive capability. The installation added 60 kilograms, enough weight to reduce bomb loads by 100 kilograms and decrease already marginal performance. Navigator Polina Gelman, who flew 860 combat missions, later recalled, "They gave us machine guns in the spring of 1943. We removed them within 2 weeks. The extra weight meant fewer bombs and worse handling. Our survival depended on not being seen, not on shooting back. The machine gun was useless against fighters anyway. We couldn't outrun them or outclimb them. Better to remain invisible and carry more explosives." Late-war desperation saw the Night Witches operating in increasingly dangerous circumstances as Soviet offensives pushed deeper into occupied territory. On July 31, 1943, during the Battle of Kursk, German forces deployed concentrated flak batteries specifically positioned to counter low-altitude harassment attacks. The 588th lost 3 aircraft in a single night near Orel. Lieutenants Yekaterina Ryabova and Vera Tarasova, Sergeants Nina Korshunova and Galina Dokutovich, Captains Polina Makagon and Nadezhda Stuladina. All 6 women died when concentrated 20mm cannon fire shredded their aircraft at 200 meters altitude. The regiment flew the next night anyway. 16 sorties, no losses, German positions burned. The most devastating incident occurred on August 1, 1943. Raisa Sernachevskaya and Natalia Smirnova were hit by anti-aircraft fire during their 4th mission of the night near Krasnodar. Their PO-2's unarmored fuel tank ignited instantly. The fabric wings burned in seconds. The aircraft spun into the ground from 400 meters altitude. Both women burned alive. Death came slowly enough that ground forces heard screaming. The 588th flew 12 more missions that night. Nadezhda Popova insisted on flying Sernachevskaya's planned targets personally. She dropped 300 kilograms of bombs on the German flak battery that had killed her friends. Post-battle assessment confirmed the battery was destroyed. By December 1943, the 588th had participated in the liberation of the Caucasus, the Kuban, and Crimea. They'd flown over 10,000 combat sorties. Total losses: 23 aircraft destroyed, 28 crew members killed. They'd dropped over 1,200 tons of bombs and 18,000 incendiary shells on German targets. The famous Yamamoto parallel demonstrated the Night Witch's psychological impact reached even strategic leadership. When Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto was killed by American P-38 fighters in April 1943, Japanese morale suffered severely. One man's death affected strategic planning. The Night Witches achieved similar effects collectively. Wehrmacht soldiers knew the women flying the Po-2s were mortal, vulnerable, and yet unstoppable. That knowledge bred despair more effectively than conventional bombing. In the war's final year, as Soviet forces drove toward Berlin, production statistics for the Polikarpov Po-2 exceeded every other Soviet aircraft type. Between 1928 and 1945, Soviet factories built approximately 20,800 Po-2 aircraft in dozens of variants. The most common versions: U-2/Po-2 Basic Trainer, 15,000 plus built, used for primary flight instruction throughout the war. Po-2VS, Voyenia Seria, Military Series, approximately 3,200 built, featuring underwing bomb racks for 200 to 300 kilogram payloads. Po-2LNB, Let Night Bomber, modified variants with improved navigation equipment, approximately 800 built. Po-2S, Sanitarnie, Medical, air ambulance configuration carrying stretchers, approximately 900 built. Po-2NAK for Soviet Navy, maritime reconnaissance variant, approximately 300 built. Distribution of production was continuous throughout the war. Peak production occurred in 1943 to 1944 when Soviet industry produced over 4,000 Po-2 aircraft annually across all variants. The aircraft's simple construction meant factories could build them rapidly with minimally trained workers using basic tools. Loss rates for the 588th Night Bomber Regiment specifically were remarkably low given operational tempo. Of approximately 80 pilots and navigators who served continuously with the regiment from 1942 to 1945, 30 killed in combat operations, 12 severely wounded requiring medical discharge, 38 survived the war. This represented a 37.5% casualty rate, devastating by conventional standards but far lower than German predictions. Wehrmacht intelligence had estimated the Night Witches would suffer 70 to 80% casualties within 6 months of operations, assuming obsolete aircraft and inexperienced pilots would be slaughtered by modern defenses. Survivor testimony revealed why losses remained controlled. Captain Irina Sebrova, who flew 1,008 combat missions, the highest total for any Night Witch pilot, explained, "We survived because we understood our limitations perfectly. We never challenged fighters. We never flew in daylight. We never attacked heavily defended targets without detailed intelligence. We accepted that each mission was dangerous, but we controlled the risks through planning, discipline, and absolute focus. The Germans expected us to be reckless because we were women. We proved that careful tactical execution matters more than courage alone." Comparative analysis with contemporary Allied bombers demonstrated starkly different design philosophies. American, Boeing B-17 Flying Fortress. Empty weight 16,400 kilograms. 13.50 caliber machine guns for defense. Self-sealing fuel tanks. Armor protection for crew. Typical survival rate after being hit 40 to 60% depending on damage location. Soviet, Polikarpov Po-2. Empty weight 635 kilograms. Zero defensive armament. No armor. Unprotected fuel tanks. Typical survival rate after being hit less than 5%. The philosophical difference was fundamental. American doctrine prioritized bringing aircrews home because training replacements required 18 months and significant resources. Soviet doctrine accepted casualties as inevitable costs of achieving mission objectives. Neither approach was inherently superior. They reflected different industrial capabilities, training pipelines, and strategic priorities. But one succeeded in the specific context of night harassment operations, and one would have failed. The B-17's weight and speed would have made silent gliding attacks impossible. The Po-2's primitiveness was precisely what made the Night Witches effective.
August 23, 1942. Morozovskaya Airfield. Major Heinrich Rall stood beside the wreckage of the Po-2 as morning sunlight revealed details he'd missed in darkness. The aircraft's serial number was still visible on the tail section, 23417, built in 1940 at factory number 387 in Leningrad. 5 years later, when the war ended, Rall would be among the Wehrmacht officers who surrendered to Soviet forces near Prague. He survived and returned to Germany in 1950. The Po-2 that opened his understanding of the Night Witches in August 1942 was one of dozens his forces would encounter. But that specific airframe, number 23417, represented something larger than its plywood and fabric construction suggested. It was evidence that warfare's human elements often mattered more than technological superiority. The final irony was complete. The aircraft Germany dismissed as obsolete in 1941 became one of the Eastern Front's most psychologically effective weapons by 1945. The women Germany assumed would be ineffective because of their gender proved more persistent, more disciplined, and more effective than many male bomber crews flying superior aircraft.
The Night Witches demonstrated that tactical innovation could overcome enormous equipment disadvantages. Their success required accepting vulnerabilities. No armor, no guns, no radios that would doom conventional bomber operations. But those same vulnerabilities enabled capabilities: silent approaches, radical maneuverability, minimal radar signature that defeated modern defensive systems. 23 Night Witches received Hero of the Soviet Union awards, the USSR's highest decoration for valor. Every surviving pilot received multiple combat medals. The 588th Night Bomber Regiment became the 46th Guards Night Bomber Aviation Regiment in February 1943, receiving Guard status reserved for elite units. Their legacy extends beyond Soviet military history into modern special operations doctrine. Contemporary asymmetric warfare emphasizes stealth, psychological impact, and exploiting enemy weaknesses rather than matching firepower. The Night Witches understood these principles intuitively in 1942. The examination of that downed Po-2 at Morozovskaya airfield provided Major Rahl with the final proof he needed. The aircraft was not poorly designed. It was brilliantly designed to achieve specific goals within severe constraints. Those goals simply included accepting that crews might not return. But accepting that risk was precisely what made the Night Witches unstoppable. In that single fact lies the entire story of why courage, innovation, and persistence matter more than superior equipment. The Night Witches proved it every night for 3 years, and the Germans never found an answer.